Hi, I'm Andrea Anthony, and you're watching Eat, Drink, and Bake with Andrea. Today I have some great recipes for you. We're going to start off with a minestrone soup, which is really hearty. We're moving on to a crusty bread with a dipping oil, and I'm using Terra Medi. This one is actually their organic olive oil, and I love this oil because it's versatile. I've used it for cooking, and now I'm using it for dipping oil. And then we're going to have our Veal Piccata dish, which is made with artichokes and oil-cured black olives. And we move on to fresh baby spinach with olive oil, garlic, lemon, and some freshly shaved Parmesan cheese. Have a lot of work to do, so let's get going. So we're going to start with our bread with our dipping sauce. Now the thing about the olive oil dipping sauce, it has to sit for a while for all those flavors to combine. So this will be the first part of our recipe. So while we're proceeding ahead, this will be kind of combining all of its flavors and marinating together. Okay, starting with that beautiful olive oil. I could actually just use this olive oil with nothing in it. It's really, really good. You can tell by the color. Okay, so we're going to empty that into our bowl. Let's just add a little bit of salt, a little bit of pepper. Now we're going to add some rosemary. The thing about rosemary is it's extremely strong, so you don't want to overpower your olive oil, just a little bit. We can add about double the amount of the oregano as we would with the rosemary. Of course, we're using our fresh garlic, not too much because again, we don't want to overpower this oil, just a little bit of garlic, fresh garlic. We have some grated cheese, freshly grated Parmesan. I'm going to give that a little bit of stir. Now, I love hot pepper, so I do use it a lot in cooking, but one thing you might want to do is if you don't want the heat in there, you can leave it on the side, and when people are eating, if they want to add their own, that's fine. But for this recipe, we're going to add a little bit. Okay, so we're going to mix that all together. Now, some people add some balsamic vinegar. I prefer to leave it like this, but what I sometimes do when I serve it is I'll have a bottle of balsamic vinegar on the table, and then you can kind of add it to the dipping bowl as you go along. So that's really it. We're going to let that sit for a little while, and the bread, I like buying a French baguette. Now the thing about a dipping oil is you kind of want the inside to be somewhat soft because it's going to absorb the oil. So what I like to do, I like serving it hot. So, 10 minutes before you're ready to serve it, pop it in about a 400-degree oven, maybe just 10 minutes or so. Just heat it up so the outside crust is nice and hot, but the inside is still soft enough so it'll absorb your olive oil. So we're not going to do that yet, but that's something you would do right before you're ready to serve it. So let's let all these flavors combine, and we're going to get our soup going. Now the first part of the minestrone is to start with the pasta. I'm going to get the pasta cooked, and I'm using an orecchiette today. And what I like about it is its little pockets. It really holds a lot of the flavor in there, and it's really good for a soup like this. If you don't, you can use elbows as well, but I like the orecchiette. It works really well with minestrone. So we're going to get this going. We're going to walk over to the stove and put it on and get everything boiling and ready to go. So we're going to start putting our orecchiette in the water, but first, let me tell you, we have about 6 quarts of water boiling. So we are at a rapid boil. You want to make sure it is a rapid boil. And add lots of salt, a good tablespoon for 6 quarts. Give it a little bit of a stir, and then you're going to add your pasta. Now, be sure to stir it around because you don't want it clumping on the bottom of the pot. Nice big pot that holds 6 quarts, and that's it. Uncovered. 10 minutes is the magic number. After 10 minutes, it's al dente to the bite, and it's going to be perfect. We're going to start by adding our olive oil to the pan. You want to heat that up a little bit before you add your olive oil and then the butter. So it's been heating, you can hear that sizzle, so you know it's ready. Okay, while that's sizzling, I'm adding the garlic, our minced fresh garlic. Just going to give that a stir, not for too long, and then the onions can go right in. Okay, so let's let that get a little bit transparent, and then we'll start adding the rest of our ingredients. So our onions are looking transparent, and we know it's time for the rest of the vegetables. So we're adding our chopped zucchini. We have our chopped carrots, nice and sweet. And our celery. And we're adding our potatoes. We're going to give that a stir, combine it well, and let's just let those cook a little bit until they're slightly tender. It's been 10 minutes, and I promise you these are done perfectly. So off to the sink we go. We're going to drain it out right now. Okay, so we have our colander ready. A little bit of cold water to stop the cooking process. So we're back at the stove. We're checking on our vegetables, and they're slightly tender, so we're ready for the next step. In goes our chopped tomatoes. I'm going to give that a stir. Okay, at this point, let's add our spices. We're going to have a little pepper, a little bit of salt. We have our sage. We have thyme, oregano, and a bay leaf. Let's mix that up a little bit. Now we're going to add our chicken broth. So we've combined our ingredients now. We have our vegetables, we have our broth, and the chopped tomatoes. We're giving that a stir. The next thing we want to do is bring this to a boil, and then I'm going to bring it back down to a simmer and let it simmer so that all the flavors combine. We've been giving this about 15 minutes for all of these flavors to combine and simmer. So now we're going to add the rest of our ingredients. We have our fresh basil, fresh flat leaf parsley, and now we're adding our beans. We have our cannelloni beans and our kidney beans. Okay, we're going to give that a stir. Now we're going to let this simmer for about 10-15 more minutes, and then we'll be back. So we've been simmering for about another 10 minutes or so, 12 minutes, just to let all the flavors combine. At this point, we're going to lower our heat, and we're going to stir in our Parmesan cheese. That's at the end of the recipe. We're going to give that a nice stir. And now we're going to taste it and adjust salt and pepper, or for that matter, any other spices you think it needs. Okay, so I'm thinking we need a little extra salt. So we're going to put a little salt in there, a little more pepper, and I'm finishing it off with a little crushed red pepper. Not too much, so it appeals to most palates. You can always add more. I'm going to give that a stir. Okay, so let's let that simmer for about another 5 or 10 minutes, and then we're ready to go. So our soup is finished, and we're going to serve it up. Let's give it a little stir. It's such a hearty soup. We have our potatoes, we have our beans, we have our vegetables, a nice broth going here with tomatoes, chicken broth, our herbs, our spices. It's a real comfort soup. Now, one thing about the pasta, I like to keep it on the side until you serve it, because if you put your pasta in the soup and then you try to reheat it the next day, the pasta gets overcooked and pasty. So not a bad idea to keep your pasta on the side. And if it's already cold, you can run some hot water over it or just dip it in hot water. But this is very hot, so we're not going to have any problem with heating this up. So you can add that toward the end, give it a stir. And by the way, this soup freezes really well. So if you're making soup, you might as well make a big pot, and whenever you have it left over, if you don't eat it within a few days, put it in the freezer, and it's great to defrost on one of those days where you need some hearty stick-to-your-ribs soup. Okay, so that's nicely stirred. Now this is the best part. Freshly grated Parmesan on top. That just adds the level that you really need in this soup. Beautiful. And again, you can always add extra salt, red pepper, whatever you like, but it's a perfect dish. It's really warm, hearty, and comforting. So we have our vegetable dish now, which is going to be a very simple dish. Sauteed baby spinach with garlic and oil, a little bit of lemon juice, and at the end, some freshly grated Parmesan cheese. Now, what I like about this recipe is, you know, when you have soup recipes like we've made and a lot of ingredients and kind of a lot of mussing and fussing, and we had our veal piccata, had a lot of steps, a lot of ingredients. The nice thing about this dish is it's very simple. It's a few basic ingredients. We throw it together really quickly, and it's a nice accompaniment to dishes that maybe take a little bit more effort. So let's get started. We're going to start with our extra virgin olive oil in our pan. Now this has a lot of olive oil, very important to the dish. The other important element is the garlic, lots of garlic. Hear that sizzle, love the sound of that garlic sizzle. Let's give that a little stir, okay? Now for this recipe, you really need a big pot because if you look at our spinach here, it's 1.5 pounds of spinach, a lot of volume. So when it first goes in, it's going to take up a good portion of the pot and we need to toss it around, which is why you need a pot like this, but it will shrink down. So don't let all that spinach scare you. It's not that much spinach. The browned garlic is important in this dish. We don't want it to be transparent, we want it to be browned because it really adds that nice toasty garlicky flavor, and that's really the flavor component of the whole dish. So that's really important to let it brown nicely, and we're at that point right now. So we're going to add our spinach. This is the challenge, getting it in the pot, not spilling it. See how I can do here. Tongs work well. You want to just kind of toss it around. And I can already see it starting to shrink as the oil coats it. So before we add our lemon juice and our salt and pepper, we're just going to toss it around the olive oil a little bit. The whole idea here is to coat the leaves. Okay, so you can kind of see now how the leaves are getting shiny, and that's how we know the olive oil is on there. Now we've decreased the volume by about half. Okay, so now we're going to add the lemon juice and some salt and pepper. Now the thing about this dish is we don't want to cook it too much. You want the leaves to be wilted. Now, I can't hear it sizzling that much, so what that tells me is the flame's too low. So we're going to bump that up a little bit, and you're going to start to hear that sizzle a little more, which is what you need for this. Just let that sit for about a minute or so, and then we're going to give it another toss. Okay, looks like we're just about done. Now you see how much that shrunk? That's because of the water content. It's all out, and we don't have the kind of volume we had last time, okay? So we're just going to give that another stir, and that's it. Doesn't have to cook a lot, just till it reduces to that size. All the leaves have been coated, the garlic is all over, and the olive oil and the salt and the pepper, and it's just a great dish. We're going to bring this over to the counter, and we're going to top it with some freshly grated Parmesan cheese. So here's our spinach, and we're going to finish it off with some freshly grated Parmesan cheese. And I like to keep this on the table when I serve it because this is the best part of the dish. There you have it, spinach, a great accompaniment for our veal piccata. And next, we're going to start our hot, crispy bread with our dipping olive sauce. Coming right back. Okay, so our next dish is a veal piccata style veal dish. And I say style because it's not a classic piccata. We're starting with our veal cutlets, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But the ingredients themselves, instead of capers, which is in a classic piccata, I'm using oil-cured olives, black olives. And that's the salt component of the recipe, the same as capers would be. But I actually prefer this recipe with the oil-cured olives. And the way that works, the olives are first cured in salt, and that removes the bitterness. And then the next layer is marinating them in olive oil, so that by the time they're bought, the bitterness is out, they're plumped up with the olive oil, and they have such a nice flavor, works really well in the sauce. So we're going to use those today. We have our chopped tomatoes, and I'm also adding artichokes, chopped artichokes. Now that Artichokes themselves don't have a lot of flavor, but I use them because they add texture and they absorb flavors of the sauce. So you have the salty component, and then you have the texture of the artichokes, which absorb the flavor of the sauce. It all works really well together in this little symphony we have going. But I do want to talk to you about the artichokes. These are canned artichokes, and they tend to retain a lot of water, and we don't want excess water in the sauce. So before you chop them, most of these are chopped, you want to squeeze them out. You see all that liquid coming out? We want that liquid out. There is a substantial amount, and that's only one artichoke. Okay, now I'm just going to break these up. But that makes a difference in the dish, so you just want to make sure that you do that. We have our olive oil, extra virgin. We have a little bit of wine. We have some chopped shallots, of course our garlic, plenty of garlic, salt and pepper. We have some fresh chopped flat leaf parsley, and we have our butter. The first thing we're going to start with, though, is getting our cutlets ready. So I'm going to clean up a little bit, and then we're going to start with our cutlets. Okay, let's start with our cutlets. Now, you can see they're cut in half. We want to pound them out a little bit. So what we're going to do is we're going to use some wax paper, like a sandwich, veal in between, and you need a mallet. Okay, we just want to give them a pound, and take your hand and kind of move it across. Okay? And actually, we'll do this in the same steps. The next thing you want to do is salt your cutlets. So we'll give them a little pound, put a little salt on, and we have them set up on our tray. And that works nicely. You don't want them too thick. The thinness of the cutlets picks up the flavor of the sauce much better. We forgot to salt that one. Okay, a little bit. Now if you use a butcher, you can have them sliced thin. I actually did use a butcher for these, but when I opened up the bag, I noticed that they really weren't quite pounded enough. So most butchers will do the work for you, but you need to check them out. I mean, for example, this is just way too thick. So you want to look at them before you put them in. I mean, some of them are okay, but touch them up a little bit. It really does make a difference in a recipe like this. By the way, I'm using Himalayan salt, pink salt. Okay, so they're all salted. We've pounded them out a little bit so they're nice and thin. We're going to clean up a little bit and we'll move over to the stove. So before we start to saute our veal cutlets, I want to show you what we're going to do. We have a couple of garlic cloves here. Okay, we're just going to cut them down the middle. I want to thin them out just a little bit. Okay, we'll actually cut that again. Because what we're going to do is disperse the flavor of the garlic into the oil. We're going to infuse it. So let's just add a little bit of oil to our pan, and we're going to get that moving around there. Okay, so you see it's starting to sizzle. We're going to let that brown a little bit, and what that will do is it'll sort of infuse that flavor into the olive oil, and it will add a nice element to the dish. You can see all your uneven spots on your pan. Not everything is perfectly flat, so you need to know that for cooking reasons, so that there will be parts of the pan that are hotter than others. You can see there's a little bit more oil in part of the pan, so we're going to just move that around a little bit. And that will also come into play when we're sauteing. You kind of have to work your pan. Okay, so we're going to flip that a little bit. Okay, now you see it's starting to smoke a little too high, so we're going to bring that down a little bit. And again, if that ever happens, you can always take your pan and just slide it off the heat. You know, let it cool down a little bit, that's okay. We don't want that really smoking too much. And as you see, our garlic is still sizzling here. The oil is hot enough, so I just want that last clove to get a little bit more brown. So we're going to come right back onto our flame right now. Now we've salted these and you can see the moisture coming out, which is really what we're looking for. Now you flour them at the last minute. So you want to have your flour very close to your pan. All right, if you let them sit in flour, they'll get pasty. And again, they should sizzle when they go into your pan. That's the idea, so we know the pan is just hot enough without smoking. Okay, we're adding that in. Also keeping a little extra olive oil aside in case you have to add more. Now usually I'll get about 4, for this size pan, about 4 cutlets going at a time. So they have plenty of room and oil around it. And we're going to cook them not too long because this is stage 1. They will be sauteed a bit, but then they get added back to the sauce to finish off. So just trying to sear them a little bit. You can really smell the garlic in the oil. It's already infused and you can smell the aroma. So it's really a nice way to start the dish. We're going to use more later, but that's a nice beginning. Okay, let's flip that now. As I said, different parts of the pan will cook at different rates, so you really just need to check your product. Kind of looking for a little bit of brown like that. This one has to go just a little more. You see I'm moving this to the hot side of the pan, the middle. You know, the thing about using a large pan is that the heat isn't equal because you have the burner that's in the middle. It's not evenly dispersed. So you need to move your product around a little bit. We're going to put them aside on a baking sheet. So, you know, have yourself a baking sheet or a large plate with either parchment paper or wax paper, and we're going to let them sit off to the side until we're ready to add them back. Okay, so we can do that right now. And we'll start our next batch. Now you can see in the pan, we probably need a little bit more olive oil. Not too much, but just enough so that we get a little browning going. And we'll finish off the rest of our cutlets, our second batch. Now some recipes call for putting the cutlets in a warm oven of 200 degrees. I've done it both ways, and I really don't find it to be necessary. I'm always concerned with them cooking too much. You know, the reality of this dish is, if you're not a veal eater, you really can do the same thing with chicken. Comes out just as nicely. You would pound out the chicken just the same, salt them, and do the same process. So if you're not a veal lover, you can always use chicken. Okay, that one's looking good. Now you can see the cutlets absorbing the oil. We're going to blot them a little bit before we put them in our sauce. So I think we're looking good. I'm going to put this off to the side. Okay, I'm going to take this off the heat for a moment, clean my hands a little bit, and I'll meet you back here. Okay, we're just going to blot these as I spoke about, just a little bit. I don't like to line them with paper towels because I've had situations where it rips off on the product. So, you know, we just want to blot it a little bit for the excess olive oil. Some olive oil is not bad. Again, we're not really adding too much more olive oil, so whatever is in here will be fine for the dish. You know, we're just kind of taking a little bit of the excess off. Now what we're going to do is we're adding our butter to the pan. And we're going to let that melt. Okay, I'm just adding a dab of olive oil, just a little bit. We're going to mix that in with our butter. And now comes plenty of garlic. Shallots. Okay, I'd like it a little higher. There we go. Now we're going to let these brown a little bit, a little golden, not too brown. So we'll let those cook. We can give it a little help by stirring it up. At this point it's caramelized, it's nice and sweet. You really can add it right back in. We're not going to add it at this point. We're going to wait a little bit. Before we add the rest of our ingredients, we're going to toss it back in there. Now would be a good time to talk about our olive. What I wanted to mention to you before is you can buy these olives pitted, and that's the easiest thing to do, but they're not always available. When I bought them, they were not available pitted. So they come as an olive wood with a pit in, but they're very plump and they're juicy. You can take the pit out so easily. You just split it and the pit just pops right out. Okay, so again, easier without the pit, but they're not always available. If you buy them with a pit in, pretty easy. Pit comes right out, and then you would chop them. I'm going to add this right back into our recipe. Okay, we're good now. We're starting to brown. Now, we're going to deglaze our pan. A little bit of white wine. So, if there was anything on the pan that was a little bit stuck to the bottom, it'll come right off when you deglaze it. And that adds a really, really nice flavor to your sauce. Okay, and you can see, you know, some little parts there from the flour that were brown have now come out off the pan, and they become part of our sauce, nice and golden. So we're adding our artichokes and our tomatoes. We're going to toss those up nicely. Let's let these flavors merge just a little bit. At this point, we're going to add a little bit of pepper. Let's just add a little bit more salt. In goes our chicken stock. We can add the garlic back now. Okay, so we're going to raise our flame just a little bit. We want to get a simmer going. In goes our parsley. And we have some sage. And we have some thyme. At this point, we've raised our heat just a little bit. Now we're going to simmer the sauce so the flavors combine and it enriches itself, and then we'll be back in a few minutes. Okay, we've been simmering for a while now. Now it's time to add the cutlets back in. And you can see why they really don't need to be kept in the oven. It's a lot easier just to have them right next to you. Okay, now you see I'm bubbling a little bit too high, so we're going to turn that down a bit. Because now they need to cook slowly and simmer for a good 15 to 20 minutes to let everything combine and get that flavor right into the veal. Now is a time for the olives. We don't want to put these in at the beginning. These are actually wonderful. You can have these by themselves. A little olive oil, garlic, rosemary, a little red pepper. They're wonderful. We'll check it about halfway through, and then another 7 minutes. We'll flip them over again. All looks great. We'll be back soon. So we've been sauteing here, simmering. Now you see how the sauce is a little bit thick? Keep some extra chicken broth just to thin it out a little bit. We're going to give that about another 2 or 3 minutes, and then we're wrapping it up. So we have our veal piccata with our artichokes, our oil-cured olives, adding just a nice little flavor to it. And we have our tomatoes and stock and wine, and it all came together to make this great sauce. Here it is. So we have our recipe lineup today, our minestrone soup with our sautéed spinach and veal piccata. Let's not forget our crispy bread with our dipping sauce with garlic, herbs, and Parmesan cheese. I hope you enjoyed the recipes today. Visit me on social media at Eat, Drink, and Bake. Hope you enjoyed the show. Thank you for watching.